Right then, so it doesn't matter how good a driver you are, if you haven't got a good car setup underneath you, pointless. So in this video we're going to take a look at the basic generics of the setups on the cars in Assetto Corsa Competizione. We'll also dive into taking it to that next level of detail by downloading MoTeC, getting it set up, and hopefully come the end of the video you'll be able to use MoTeC to a basic standard, which for ACC, to be honest, that's all you need it for. You don't need to be a data engineer or a rocket scientist or anything like that. Setups in this game are very in-depth and they replicate reality fairly well, so it's very, very important you understand what you're doing. So for this video, we'll cover the basics of car setup and get you set up on MoTeC as well. Later in the series, we'll do a video where we go a bit deeper into the car setup itself and we'll look into everything. So geometries, mechanical grip, damping, aero, all of it. But first, you need to walk before you can run. So in the dry, tyre pressures want to be around 27.5 to 28 psi, that is the window, and in the wet, they want to be between 30 and 31 psi. For qualifying and sprint races as well, up to say 1.5 hours, you'll want to be using brake pad 1. For longer races, you want to be using brake pad 2. Pad 3 and 4 are experimental, and to be honest, I would just stick to pad 1 and 2 in all scenarios. Core tyre temperature in the dry should be between 80 and 95 degrees. In the wet, anything between 30 and 80 degrees is decent. It's in the window roughly. This is why in qualifying, your second and third laps are usually the quickest, as it takes a lap or two sometimes to get the core tyre temps fully in the operating window. Basically, in terms of temperature, you want your tyre and brake indicators in the game to be green all over. You want to avoid the brakes getting a yellow/red colour in the braking zones, as this means they're getting too hot. Hot brakes, as we know, are never good, and you want to avoid the same thing with the tyres as well. With that being said though, making sure both the brakes and the tyres don't go a bluey colour is equally important, as we know cold brakes and tyres are just as detrimental to performance as overheating brakes and tyres. If we're talking about the brakes for a minute, in terms of temperature, you want to aim for around 720 degrees on the front brakes, around 470 degrees on the rear brakes. The way you can obviously adjust this is changing the value of the brake ducting in the setup. Now in the setup, when you make a change, there's usually one or two, maybe even more knock-on effects. So for example, if we take the brake ducting for example, if we increase the brake ducting trying to get the brake temp up, there's going to be more heat around that area, so your tyre temp and your tyre pressures are going to go up with it. So my best advice really would be you only change one or two things at a time, because it's so easy with the setups to get lost. Now you may be wondering, how on earth do I even see the figures and numbers I've just mentioned to you? Well, MoTeC's what you need. So before ACC, I never really used data in sim racing. I never really saw the point of it. But ACC, because it is so realistic, especially with the setups, I think data and MoTeC becomes beneficial, because in real life they use a lot of data. Now like all these things, don't worry, I know the pain in the arse is always setting it up, but don't worry, that is what I'm here for. I'm going to help you guys set up MoTeC. In the description below there's a link to the software. Download it, and you'll want to use a workbook to display all of the data in the software itself. A link to the workbook I use is also down in the description below. Once you've downloaded the software and the workbook, you want to move the workbook folder you've downloaded into the following folder. When you've done this, load up the MoTeC software and select Open an existing workspace. Then you should be able to open that workbook we've already downloaded, and from that moment onwards you should be able to open MoTeC and select it via the shortcut every single time. So it's nice and easy. Now you've got the software and the workbook downloaded, there's something you need to do in ACC itself to get this all working. Go into ACC, go into any session, offline or online, in any car, on any track, and once you've loaded into the session, go into the setup, go to the electronics section, and then increase the telemetry laps figure to any number. Exit the session, close the game. If you hadn't done this before already, we've now created the relevant folder where all the data produced by the game will export to. The folder we've just created should be the one that's on your screen right now. It's worth noting the number you set the telemetry laps value to determines how many laps it puts into one data file before it makes a new data file. Regardless of the situation though, I like to keep it simple. I always put this figure to the maximum value I can, so this is the first thing I do when making a new setup. So once you've done some running in a session, you should have some data files to play with and look at. Here's how you open those files and view them. In MoTeC, once you've loaded the workbook we downloaded earlier, press File in the top left hand corner, then open Log File. Then you'll need to navigate to the folder where all of this data is, which is the one on your screen if you forgot. Once you've done this, you won't need to do it again. It should just load the correct folder every single time you want to open a log file. Now at this stage we've got it all set up. Don't be scared by the infinite numbers and lines everywhere on your screen. It's not imperative you know all of it. To be honest, you don't really need to know much of it. You just need to know where to find what you need to know. So on the left you have the laps you've completed, and along the top you have the different data tabs. When playing ACC, I only use tabs 7 and 9 for the most part, otherwise labelled as suspension histogram and rake. Tab 7 is specifically for dampers, which is something we'll look into a bit more in episode 5 of this series when we dive more into the car setup. Tab 9 is where you want to go for now, and in this tab the stuff we're interested in is the rake angle, the brake temperatures, the bump stops and the tyre temperatures. If you can't see a particular channel of data, then in the top left corner there's a pop-out menu called channels. These different channels will have names that aren't always the most obvious to recognise. Tyre temperature, for example, is tyre_TER. There will be 4 of these channels, one for each corner of the car, so RF stands for right front, LR stands for left rear, and so on. Just double click each channel, then it will be added to the workbook where you'll be able to see the data. On the flip side, if you want to get rid of a channel from the workspace, double click on it in the workbook. It will disappear. It's not gone forever though, it will just be stored in that little pop-out menu we looked at earlier, the channels one, should you want to use it again one day. Regarding the bump stops and the rake angle, we'll dive more into these topics along with the rest of the car setup in episode 5. The brake and the tyre values to aim for though, we already mentioned earlier in the video. At least now you can check them and adjust the setup accordingly. Now to be honest, I'm very conscious of not going into too much detail because MoTeC's very complex, has a lot of potential to see a lot of data, but for what we need it for, assettocorsacompetizione, we don't need to. What I would say is the more you ever play with it, the more you'll understand the software. And if you're interested in this sort of stuff, it can be very interesting. It's a good way to understand how the car works, both when driving the car and when making setup changes as well. Me, I like to keep things simple though, and in this video, we've only covered the basics. There we go then, and breathe. You're now set up with MoTeC and understand the very basics of car setup, and this is a great foundation to have moving forward. In episode 5 of this series though, we'll have a proper look at the car setups in this game and how they work. I was just thinking of using the McLaren as it's the car I know the best, but if you think otherwise, do let me know down in the comments below. If you found this helpful, please give it a thumbs up, sub up to the channel so you don't miss any more of these, and if you do have any issues setting this stuff up, then please let me know down in the comments below. I will try and answer as many as possible, but thank you for watching. Until the next video, I'll see you soon.